You are listening to Light-Hearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is January 19th, 2025. This is another edition of Light-Hearted Light, where we revisit interviews from the past 6 years of this podcast. Today we're going to listen to an edited version of a conversation that was first heard in episode 81 back in September 2020. The guest is Rob Benchley. Rob is the volunteer modern-day keeper of Sankaty Head Lighthouse and the Sconset Village on Nantucket in Massachusetts. He's also an accomplished photojournalist who has been the staff photographer for 3 island newspapers, and his photography has been featured in the New York Times and the Boston Globe. He has written or co-written several books, including Keeping the Light, about the historic move of Sankaty Head Lighthouse back from the edge of an eroding bluff back in 2007. Rob and his wife Carol, a retired Nantucket schoolteacher, live in a house they built together in Sconset. In this interview, we discussed Rob's experiences when the lighthouse was moved and his position as volunteer keeper. We also talked about the fact that he was one of the first people on the scene when Great Point Lighthouse in Nantucket was toppled by a storm in March 1984. And I especially love the comments Rob made about the need to preserve lighthouses toward the end of the interview. Let's listen to my conversation with Rob Benchley now. Back in March 1984, a Great Point Lighthouse at the northern tip of Nantucket was destroyed in a storm. The old tower fell over. And you were one of the first people on the scene to photograph the ruins after the storm. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that was quite a storm. It was one of those typical 3-day nor'easters that New England gets. And Great Point Lighthouse had been pretty close to the edge of the beach for some time. And this storm just took it out and it totally collapsed. And so myself and a couple of reporters from the Inquirer-Mirror and the Boston Globe, they came down and we borrowed somebody's Wagoneer Jeep. And the only time the tide was right to cross over the sand spit that had been washed away was like 5:30 in the morning that particular week. So we were up and at 'em about 3:30 and we drove out to an area what's called the Galls. And it's a low spit of sand that always gets washed over in big storms. But this time it was chest deep when we got there, and we waited for the tide to come down a little bit. And we waded across probably a couple of 100 yards of barrier beach that was submerged. And it was probably pretty stupid. But we did make it across, and we got a bunch of photographs, and we couldn't be there very long because once the tide goes out, it has a tendency to come back in. So I think we were only there about 35 minutes. So we got our photographs, and always with the nervousness of knowing that we could get stranded out there for a whole nother tide cycle. So we went back and did just fine. But the next day, Stan Grossfeld's photographs were on the front page of the Boston Globe. And the following week, obviously, the Inquirer-Mirror ran a full story and photographs, aerials too. It was a big deal here. I wrote a little thing about that adventure, and my final line was, if my mother had been here, she would have spanked me. Wow. Anyway, we made it fine.
Yeah, that was quite an adventure. And for our listeners who don't know, Great Point Lighthouse was rebuilt not too long after the old tower was destroyed using modern materials, so it's not likely to fall over again anytime soon.
Yeah, that's correct. One of our local contractors, Augie Ramos, did a lot of the work, and they poured a solid concrete cone substructure, beautiful, tapered, wonderful thing. It was all engineered and with a very, very deep foundation. And then they spent a few weeks with actual granite block to put the veneer on, and it's real thick, 1 foot thick granite blocks. A lot of the old granite was used in putting up the newer tower. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a project and beautifully done. And now it's got a solar panel on it and flashing away.
So you've been living in the Sconset Village on Nantucket for a few decades now, and that's where Sankaty Head Lighthouse is located. It was a whaling and fishing village and later an actors' colony. I've been there, and I know Sconset feels different from the rest of the island. So what makes Sconset so special?
I think what makes Sconset special is it's remote. It really it's on the elbow, the eastern elbow of the island, and the air is a little different. The wind's always blowing, and I think people-wise, it was always it was an outlier to the town, and people were drawn to it for its wildness, except it's also sometimes quite civilized. There were all kinds of things going on out here. So I think it's the air. You don't have to go very far outside of the village to be in total wildness. And you're right on the edge of kind of a natural potential for chaos. I don't think that's ever spoken, but I think that is so much in the air. It's so pretty and lovely and everything, but there's Mother Nature just around the corner eating away at it. And yeah.
So what do you think Sankaty Head Lighthouse means to Sconset and to Nantucket?
I think Sankaty means a lot to the people of Nantucket and also people of Sconset, because there are a lot of firsts there. People like to have, it was the first Fresnel lens in the U.S. Well, actually, it was the second, but lots of firsts, and it's on a high bluff overlooking the ocean, part of that wildness I was talking about earlier, and reasonably old, built in 1849 and lit first in 1850, and really probably saved thousands of lives by its very existence, as many lighthouses have done over the years. And it's a local icon, and you can see Sankaty Light from almost anywhere on the island if you're pretty much high enough. You can always see it from any approach by water, and it's a nice, safe beacon that you can see and find, and it's welcoming. And people, when they're on the land, they go up there and they walk around, and you can see people hugging the lighthouse. So that's that's pretty special.
Just another note on the Fresnel lens. I believe Sankaty was the first lighthouse in the U.S. to be built with the Fresnel lens as part of its original equipment back in 1850.
Correct, yes. The engineer, who was Benjamin Franklin Isherwood, who was a very young man at the time, he went on to be the chief engineer for the Union in the 1860s. And that poor guy had to go all the way to France to talk with the manufacturer of that Fresnel lens. It must have been a wonderful junket in those days. He came back with the goods.
So you co-wrote and did the photography for a beautiful book called Keeping the Light, which was about the move of Sankaty Head Lighthouse back from the edge of that rapidly eroding bluff. Before the move, were you monitoring the erosion very closely yourself?
Yeah, the erosion was, for me anyway, and people in Sconset, became really obvious in the 1970s, and it increased each year, and it just seemed like every year there was another area that slumped into the ocean. And in the early 1980s, people started saying we've got to figure out something, and working with the Coast Guard, and nobody really knew what to do. They just knew they had to do something, and trying to armor the beach was first at top, and it became clear that as another decade and a half went by, that moving was going to be the only option. Originally, Sankaty was built 250 feet back from the edge of the top of the bluff. And when they finally moved it, it was about 70 feet.
So what is the Sconset Trust?
Well, the Sconset Trust primarily was a land preservation organization. And it started in, I think it was 1984. And when development was kind of eating up a lot of places, and it really wasn't, I don't think the Sconset Trust was born out of anger or anything. It was just that, okay, we got to keep an eye on this, and where do we want to develop and where do we not want to. And so they started as a land trust, and with private donations they were able to pick up a parcel here and there, and it worked well because there's the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, which is island wide. They're primarily concerned with larger tracts of open space. They love the idea of the Sconset Trust because it was a local effort and local pieces that were dear to the hearts of people who lived in Sconset. And it's been really good for the village. And so they moved into historic preservation. They started encouraging people to put restrictions on the architectural restrictions on their houses. Then the Sankaty problem was a big elephant in the room. And I think they just decided that they had the the intent and the desire to take it on. So, and they did.
They had a big role in the moving of the lighthouse.
Yeah, they did. Once they had a plan and a company who was interested in moving it and a commitment from the Coast Guard and the area residents and the voters, they went ahead and they did some major fundraising over a couple of years, and it may not have even been that long. It was pretty brief, and they raised a lot of money, and the whole island, it seemed, came out to help out and make donations and then watch the whole move. It was this beehive of activity for a few weeks in the fall of 2007, and I don't know, for my thinking, it just worked out so well. I can't imagine it working any other way.
Did you have a role in that process?
I was involved primarily as to document this, and actually it worked well because I was sort of between newspapers, so I had the time to do it. So I jumped right in, and I was up there every day. And the company that actually did the moving said to me, you're welcome to be anywhere, go anywhere, do anything. Just always wear your hard hat and stay out of our way. That's exactly what I did. So, I mean, the access to the whole project was quite awesome. Normally, as working for newspapers and magazines, press people aren't always allowed around. And I was able to get right up close, and it couldn't have been more, it was just ideal.
What was the move like when it was completed? It must have been very emotional for everyone. It took so much to get to that point.
On that last day that it was finally in its new home, there was a great big sigh across Nantucket, I think, because, it was in its new place, and it was going to be good for another few decades anyway. It was a very sunny, bright day, and they got to the last half an inch, and then the last quarter of an inch, and then the last eighth of an inch, and they went, okay, stop. And everybody, yay! It was a great cry went up. And then later in the day, one of our local pilots flew his biplane over the lighthouse with his smoke streamers around it. He did a couple of loops around the lighthouse, and of course that made it to the cover of the book. The move was over, and then there was a lot of grunt work of re-landscaping and shoring up the foundation and stripping the old paint and doing the grounds. That took another 8 months, I would say. And then they had a grand reopening the following July, I believe, with lots of fanfare, and it was just great.
You are now the modern-day keeper for Sankaty Head Lighthouse. How did that come about?
Yes, which I dryly call the civilian keeper. That's the title I use when I have to write letters to the U.S. Coast Guard, who they maintain the actual beacon itself, and the Sconset Trust does everything else. And my wife and I live here in Sconset year-round, so we're here. The Sconset Trust just needed someone to sort of look after it, and as a result of being there when it was moved, I'm friends and cohorts with the engineering company that actually did the move. So there's a lot of contact. So I'm here year-round, and I've got everybody's phone numbers, and it just kind of made sense. And I tell you what, it was a little boy's fantasy come true. And they gave me that key. It glowed in my hand. I said, oh,
it's like the ring in Lord of the Rings or something.
It was the ring, exactly. And my duties are varied. They aren't prescribed or proscribed as things come up. But we have visitors to the lighthouse, and there are open houses now and again. So I open it up and make sure it's clean and swept. And our last open house, I actually had to take out the trash. That entertained everybody waiting in line. But also just, keep an eye on it. And also we're starting to put more exhibits. As we have more and more people visiting the lighthouse, we put more interpretive exhibits on the inside, mostly descriptive posters with timelines and photographs and posters and things, and just to make it easier for the visitor. So it's very exciting, and really we have all kinds of great ideas coming up, and mostly to make everybody's experience there more informative and have some fun, and hopefully move into a place where we can have the lighthouse open much more frequently than it is now.
Well, if you open a lighthouse, they will come. I'm sure you get a lot of people. Even if you open the lighthouse every day, I think you get a lot of people every day. And Nantucket is certainly a busy place in the summer. So I have one more question for you for bonus points.
Oh, good.
So get ready.
All right.
Why do you think it's important to preserve lighthouses in general, and why is it important to preserve Sankaty Head Lighthouse?
Well, I really believe that preserving lighthouses is essential. It's painful to see them go into disrepair or get destroyed or abandoned, because it's such an incredible connection, not only to the past, but lighthouses are emotional. They make people feel things. They make people think of, days gone by, but also they're a witness, they're a sentinel, and they appear to be everlasting, although they're not. But I just think that they're symbols of strength and longevity, and they've also saved thousands of lives. And I think that that as a background is applicable to Sankaty because of the history of Nantucket and the history of shipping and whaling and everything nautical. It sort of stands as a link between what's going on in the ocean and what's in people's hearts. And I think lighthouses just are in people's hearts.
Yeah, that's why the name of this podcast is Lighthearted.
I walked right into that one.
Yeah, that's why it's light space hearted. It doesn't mean humorous, although sometimes it can be humorous, but it means people who have lighthouses in their hearts, which I think is pretty much everyone. So that was beautifully said. And Rob, it's been a great pleasure talking with you today. It's been a few years since I've been on the island. I hope to get back sometime soon and maybe get together with you.
That'd be terrific, and I can show you some of our interpretive exhibits in there at the Lite. Hopefully at that point I'll still have a key, but no, that'd be great.
Rob Benchley's book, Keeping the Light, about the move of Sankaty Head Lighthouse, is for sale through the website of the Sconset Trust. Go to sconsettrust.org. That's SCONSET trust.org, sconsettrust.org. Click on Shop. There's also a book called Voices of the Village, featuring Rob's photography of Sconset. Rob loves the lighthouse and the village at Sconset, and he has all the right contacts, which makes him the perfect modern-day keeper for Sankaty Head Lighthouse. He's also one of the most important photojournalists in New England in the past few decades, and it's always a pleasure speaking with him. I'll be seeing Rob at Sankaty Head when I help to lead a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour of Cape Cod and the islands this coming September. To find out more about that, go to uslhs.org and look under Travel, click the link for tours. You'll see that there are also tours this year in Australia, France, the Azores, and Lake Superior's North Shore. USLHS tours are a great way to see lighthouses and to experience local culture in some beautiful places. We will be back with a regular edition of Lighthearted next Sunday. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and keep a good light.